and you're listening to the Salescraft Podcast at Breakthrough Brands. Art, welcome to the show. How are you?
I am doing phenomenal, Joe. Thank you for having me back again.
I am absolutely delighted on having you back here. You know, one of the things, I very rarely get guests back on the show that I've had before. And you were one of those guests that always stuck in my mind. A man that when you talk about sales, knows prospecting, and has the love of it as well. So that was 7 years ago. Tell me, how's 7 years been for you?
7 years have been great. I've had some changes since then, not in the sense of not focusing on what I was focusing on before. I've actually added to that, and adding to that means working more on the mind and identity part of sales, which so many trainers do not focus on. And really what's important about that, as you well know, is that we can give all of the how-tos and scripts and this is what to say type of training to salespeople, but if they're not the person who's actually going to do it, it doesn't matter because they're still going to be the same person. It's kind of like the person who decides at the first of the year that they're out of shape and they're overweight and they're going to go to the gym and they're going to change things. And that lasts how long? Maybe the middle of January? Because internally, they're not the person who is going to do the things that it needs to take to get the results that they want. They have it all backwards. So anyway, that's a long answer to a short question.
Yeah, no, it's great because I can get it, and it is about focus and discipline. And if you look at the gym, you know, it's not 1 month, it's slowly doing it. When I had a fitness studio many moons ago, the person that came in and did the gym every day, they'd be gone in a month. And the person that actually came in and did 3 classes a week, they're the ones that stayed for a lifetime. So it's not a marathon. It's actually just, you know, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon, I should say. One of the things, and you mentioned it there, confidence. I think confidence trumps everything. But to have confidence, you need certain elements, certain steps in place to build that confidence. What would you say they would be?
Well, most of all, I would say that confidence comes from competence. So I enunciated there. Competence meaning being very well versed in, first of all, your market, the people that you're calling. So much training starts with, here's our product, here's our feature, here's our benefits. But I remember even back as a newbie in corporate life, I would sit back and the common sense part of me would say, but why would somebody want this? And that actually should be the first question where all training starts and all learning starts. Why would somebody want this? And that's actually one of my pillars of being an ultimate sales professional, and that's being others focused. I'm getting a little bit off track here, but the competence part is being a master at being others focused in terms of why would somebody be interested in what I have? What problem is it going to solve for them? What pain is it going to ease? What is it going to help them get that they really value? And then I need to make sure that I'm in a mindset where I'm going to ask those questions to uncover those things to find out, do we even have a fit, as opposed to just pitching what I want to pitch. So it's being competent in that. It's also being competent in my process and my messaging and not winging it. And that means, what am I going to say? Even prior to that, how am I going to prepare for my calls? What kind of research am I doing? How am I going to prepare for what I'm going to plug into my process, which is, what am I going to say to open the call? What am I going to say if I reach voicemail? What am I going to say when I reach an assistant? And then after I create interest in that first 20 seconds, what questions am I going to ask to get them into the conversation so I can uncover those things that will help me determine, will we have a fit with what I may be able to help them with. And then when you have all those things dialed in and then you practice them, because the performance, you know, Joe, sales is part art, no pun intended, and part science, right? The science part are the proven things psychologically that we do during our sales process, the blocking and tackling, the questioning, the openings, and all those things. The art part is the performative part, right? And we get better at performing by what? Performing. Yeah. But practice doesn't make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect. I didn't make that up, obviously. But and so many people will say, well, we it's a numbers game. You got to put in more numbers. It's like, I don't know if you golf. Golf's pretty big where you live. But so often golfers will say, well, if I just played more, I'd be better. Well, that's not actually true at all, because if you don't have a swing that's going to get a good result, you're just getting better at being bad. Again, long answer there.
No, but I get that. And here's the one thing that resonates with it is, a lot of people say, how do you, you get this, so how do you close a deal, or how do you close a sale? I remember doing a government initiative program with budding entrepreneurs, and everyone's going, how do you close a deal? And that's not the part. The part is at the very beginning that matters. And what is it? When you walk into a room or speak to someone, it's something like your subconscious mind is picking up 2,000 data points, and it's deciding lean in or lean out. What is the new phrase today? But it's, do I like this person or not? Simple. Mm-hmm. And I, through my years, I've been in sales 30 years, not as long as yourself, but, we're, as I said to someone, we're coming legacy. But what I've really focused on my belief is it's that very beginning of, we can call it fact finding, call it blueprinting, call it, detective work. There's many different names for it. But it's getting that down to a point where you are actually offering value. You're understanding to see what their concerns are, problems, whatever it may be, and have a conversation with them that resonates with the buyer. And I don't think many people get that. And I don't think that there's many people put into time to that, because there's a belief, if I just show them my product, they'll fall in love with it and they'll buy. No, you have to spend the time in curiosity. And I think if you spend that time in curiosity, everything else comes a little bit easier along the way. What's your thoughts?
Nailed it. And curiosity is one characteristic that a lot of people don't even think about or focus on. Matter of fact, I did an entire training on it for my coaching group. And there are a lot of things that we can do to cultivate curiosity. Some people are just curious by nature. Other people are not, and they're just not very self-aware. And what you just summarized there, Joe, is the most simplest concept in human behavior, but yet probably one of the hardest for salespeople to execute, because they're so focused on, I got to sell what I want to sell, as opposed to stopping and thinking. And I came up with an acronym for this, and it's WIT, W-I-T, which stands for what interests them. Before you go into any conversation, actually any human interaction, stop and think, not what do I want this person to do? Like, do I want this person to go to the restaurant with me that I want to go to? Or do I want my kids to clean up the room because I want them to clean up their room? Instead, stop and say, wait a minute, what interests them first? And then how can I appeal to that? And that means I got to be curious first. So if I want somebody to go to lunch with me, I'd want to be curious about, well, geez, do they even like Chinese food?
Oh, and if they do, would they pay? That usually you pay. That usually brings them along.
Yeah, I'd be curious about who's going to pay in the office here first. Yeah, Joe will pay.
Did you say free food? Yes, we're all going. All going. Do you've been in sales a long time. What's the one thing that you found over the years that people struggle with the most?
Well, there's so many things that people struggle with. I would say the one thing that unnecessarily hinders people in the sales process and actually causes them to get out of sales, which I think probably everybody listening to this has experienced, whether you're in sales or not, is fear, and mainly fear of this thing called rejection. And if you're just listening, I held up air quotes because, get this, rejection does not exist. That's an interesting comment, isn't it? Let me explain it. Because when I have a group of people, I always ask them, who here has been rejected before? And all the hands go up in the air, right? And then I'll ask them, how do you know? how do you know if you've been rejected? And then the answers are, oh, I got hung up on, or they told me they went somebody else, with somebody else, or they said, don't call again. And I'll say, okay, that's fair. All those things happen in sales, right? Matter of fact, if you're making calls, those things are going to happen. But is rejection what happens to you or the way you define what happens to you? And it's always the way you define what happens to you, because all those things that I mentioned, they're just things. They are experiences. And one of the favorite quotes that I live by is from a transformational coach. His name is Jim Fortin. And he said, nothing has meaning until I give it meaning. Because if somebody gave you a no, that's just a no. It operates in a vacuum. Now, you could say that, oh, I got rejected, so therefore that's a story you told yourself. Somebody else could say, okay, well, maybe there wasn't a fit, and here's what I could have done differently, but at least I learned when their expiration date is on their current contract. So therefore, I don't look at it as I got rejected. I look at it as I got a win on this call. I got information. And so the biggest fear that most people experience, they bring on themselves because of the stories that they tell themselves.
I can remember when I was rejected, and I think it's part of social, instruction when I was younger and, 14, 15 in the school disco and going up to ask the girl to dance and she go, no, and didn't know what to do. So I went and asked her friend, would you like to dance? And she said no. And then I asked her friend and they said no. And then walked back to my friends on the other side of the room as they're all laughing at me. And, that was rejection, but it also built up courage as well. And I think that's probably helped me on my sales. One of the things that I really like is that, and I say this to clients, before you even get in to a talk, and you can relate to this, research is so much important, and AI has assisted us in doing that research and helping that with the research. But the first thing I always say to people is preempt. So in your mind, preempt the conversation. You should know that if you're speaking to an engineer, he sees the sales picture slightly different than someone that's in an MBA or someone who has a different degree of qualification. So you have to visualize all these different people and preempt what you want from the outcome. That could be an appointment, that could be to see who is the authority, see how many people are involved, but plan what you want from it at the very beginning as well.
Yeah, I call that the primary objective, and we should never start out a call or an engagement without first knowing what's my endpoint. So I define the primary objective as what do I want this person to do as a result of this call? Because I'll use an analogy. Most people would not just get in their car and start driving without knowing where they want to go, right? But I also joke, unless, of course, you're a guy, because we'll always say, I'll find it, right? But so many salespeople will jump on a call and they'll just kind of meander wherever it's going to take them, as opposed to having a specific endpoint. And the other benefit of having the specific endpoint before we start, and, Stephen Covey said, begin with the end in mind, is that we can work backwards from that. So then when I say to myself, well, at the end of this call, I want them to agree to doing this. Then I work backwards and reverse engineer it and say, okay, in order for them to agree to do this, what are all the other steps that we need to cover first, especially in their mind, to get them there? So what will they have to be thinking? What information do I need? So then that helps me with the questioning. And so now the call is pretty well planned out. Now, with all that being said, the prospect and the person at the other end of the line does not have that script. So it may go off the rails a little bit. So this is where we need to be prepared for guiding it back in or taking it where they want to take it. So, for example, if they're talking about another problem that maybe is a little bit different than the one that we were thinking about, we're going to let them go with it and go deeper because they're going to buy for their reasons, not ours, right?
Yeah, it's quite strange as we move in, not strange, wrong word, as we move into 2026 and with all these platforms that we have. And, we're talking about the conversation and, people, we've always said people buy off people and it's a conversation that matters. And it's being able to ask the right questions in a conversational way that makes a difference. I just want to move the conversation slightly to the likes of LinkedIn. And LinkedIn has evolved in such a way, I call it a Rolodex. It's got, it's got everything we want to know about everybody who is on it, of course. And from cold calling, people now are messaging. So DMs, and we live in a generation which is a lot younger than us that don't know how to use a phone, so they DM. And now there is the likes of, instead of cold calling, you can leave a video message for someone on LinkedIn. What's your thoughts about how that's evolving and the structure of, say, let's call it the prospecting arm of sales?
Yeah, well, it certainly has evolved. And like you mentioned, we've both been around for a while. I've been around a little bit longer than you have, back when they were dial-up phones. No, actually, they were touch tone back when I started.
They were dial-up when I was started. We're about 10 years behind you.
So I've seen all the changes in technology over the years, and one thing has never changed, and you mentioned that, and that is the very best form of communication is, and most effective, is a human speaking with another human. And over the years, we've had all these various forms of technology that can be looked at a couple different ways. The lazy people and the ones looking for the easy button would look for it as a way to do their job for them and avoid personal communication, where the smart ones would always use it as a tool to help enhance their chances of having more and more effective communications, personal communications. And the same thing is true today. And I agree with you, not to indict an entire younger generation, but we can't overlook the facts that so many people today in the workforce grew up not speaking on a phone, but using it as a toy or a source of typing on to communicate with somebody in complete sentences, right? But there are some young people in the workforce today who are absolutely crushing it because they understand that technology is a great tool to help them actually have more conversations. And you mentioned video. I think video is phenomenal in prospecting in the sense that it helps us to bridge the visual gap. For those of you that are watching us on video, I mean, obviously we have another form of communication here, which helps you in the consumption process. Maybe it's a plus, maybe it's a minus if you're looking at me. But the fact is that we can get our message across and make it more human through the use of video. But the key is the video is not the message. The message is still the message. So we still have to have something of relevance, something of value that's going to resonate with someone. You have probably, like I have, received video messages that were just awful because they didn't touch on anything that really was relevant to me or even pertained to me, and was totally off base, and they used apologetic techniques, which I make fun of quite often. But when it's used in the right way, it can be extremely effective, because you mentioned something earlier, you used the word preemptive. A video message is not as common as voicemail, email, or even a phone call. So if we have one, it's going to probably generate a little bit more curiosity, and if it is a relevant message, it likely is going to get more attention than any of those other forms of communication on their own. So when used correctly, I'm all in favor of it.
I think it sort of also, there's an energy behind it. So people see you, they see the face. Remember when we said when you walk into that room, the subconscious mind picks up those data points. And I think that's where it works. I find it very effective, because I got such a lovely Irish accent.
An understandable Irish accent.
Understandable Irish accent. That's because it's funny, I've been working with, people in America for decades, that even when I'm sitting at home, so we call, autumn fall. So we call it autumn, and I'd be sitting at the table and I'd say to my wife, says, fall. And she goes, what do you mean the fall? It's because I hang out with too many Americans, so that's it. And so it's one of the things as well, which is really curious with me, is the whole sales process. You have founders or owners who sell, and they would believe that they're really good at selling. but they've never been trained to sell. So even though they're selling and closing deals, they're missing opportunities. Do you find that as well, that there's people out there going, I can sell, but when you explain to them that professional selling can actually change the direction of how they go, that they should invest in it? Or does pride or ego get in their way?
Yeah, there's so much there that you just talked about. And I want to touch on something that a lot of people don't even realize. Everybody was born a salesperson. Think about it. Because who are the greatest salespeople in the world? Kids.
Like kids, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the characteristics of kids, they're resilient to no's. They will ask all the time. They're abundantly curious about everything, right? And there's so many other traits and characteristics. But the thing is, as time goes on, many times it's indoctrinated out of them that don't ask so many questions, or don't be nosy, or don't be pushy, or don't be asking, all these things. And then they also start developing this fear of being rejected again, which are stories that they're telling themselves. Getting back to your question about founders, very often I've found, you can tell me if this is true with you, that if you have a founder, they have come up with an idea that met a need that definitely is needed out in the marketplace. Not that a lot of things will sell themselves, but many times the idea or the product or service is so good that in a sense it sells in spite of the founder. And even though it's selling, they're thinking that they're the ones doing the selling, when in fact it could be that they came up with a phenomenal product or service to meet the need in the marketplace. But that doesn't necessarily scale because they might have just skimmed the cream, right? And then when it comes to actually having to scale and go out there and talk to the masses, people who maybe are not at the top of the need funnel, but nevertheless could benefit from what they have, that's when the selling really has to take place. And that's when you can't rely just on personality and you're throwing the product out there and letting it sell itself. So that's when we need professional selling skills. We need a professional process, and you need all the things that go into that process, such as creating the initial interest and the discovery and presenting or recommending in such a way that it's going to meet those needs.
Yeah, I think that what happens is you get a founder and they're selling and they're really good at selling and they're closing deals, and then they'll get a couple of salespeople in, and the salespeople will get it to a certain stage, but then they feel they have the need to jump in and close the deal, and the founder's running around. He's also jumping in the car and driving down the road to speak to a customer, or there's a customer service issue when he's dealing with that. So he's wearing lots of hats. And what happens is it causes burnout. And what they should be doing is going, okay, I'm really good at it, but if I want this business to really scale, I need to show these people, give them the conviction that I have in our services. And I think that the only way that can happen is to get them trained. Because if you take in, say, 3 or 4 salespeople, Johnny's selling this way and Mike's selling that way and Tony's selling that way, they're all maybe doing business, but you can't track it or measure it because you don't have a system, a process and behavior to help the business grow.
It's funny you mentioned that, because I just did my newsletter, I think last week or 2 weeks ago. And I came up with a name for that person because I've seen them in so many organizations, and I'll call him Bob. So Bob, and not necessarily in a founder company, but maybe a company that's been around for a while. And I've had so many sales leaders pull me aside at the beginning of training and say, you really just don't pay a whole lot of attention to Bob. Bob's been here for 20 years, and he kind of does things his own way, and he usually kind of hits his numbers, so we put up with him, but Bob doesn't follow the process, which really is a cancer in an organization, because then you have new people coming in looking at Bob going, well, Bob doesn't follow the rules, why should I? Or they can look at the rules or the sales process as kind of a guideline as opposed to a playbook. And this is the way we do things. And it's really tough to scale that. Like as you mentioned, when everybody's doing their own thing. It's like any kind of sports team where you have all the players kind of being individuals as opposed to operating as a team.
Yeah, it's, I look at it, I don't know if it was your newsletter, Tiger Woods, he has a coach to help him with his swing. He has a coach to help him holding the club. He has a coach helping him with, the shoulder movement. He has multiple different coaches that actually help him play better. And we look at Tiger Woods and go, oh my God, he's an amazing. But all the different coaches that he has and the practice and watching to see what he does makes him a superstar. And I think that's important that sales teams within organizations need to actually do that as well.
Yeah, and actually, let me point out one more thing about Tiger Woods, and he's certainly kind of in the twilight of his career here. He might make another comeback, who knows, but probably the greatest golfer of all time, arguably. When he was at his prime, he looked at it as not being good enough. And he decided, I just don't need to tweak something. I'm going to completely tear down what I'm doing, not tweak it. He hired a coach to completely rebuild what he was doing because he knew he had more in him. And that's the kind of mindset that the top salespeople have. They're never satisfied, as opposed to Bob, who says, hey, I'm hitting my numbers. This is the way I do things.
I'm sure you have many stories through your years. And, there's one thing that we do like is storytelling. And coming from Ireland, there is a word called Shanachie, and that's storyteller.
Really? Okay.
What story in your sales career sticks out the most that makes you laugh? Personal story, business that you came across over the years and scratched your head and went, oh my God, that's that working, or a memorable story that you could share with us.
Yeah, boy, I've got so many stories that I have shared over the years. This one kind of puts me on the spot a little bit. A story about somebody else. I would say that I'm going to share a story of my next door neighbor who was the CEO of a major healthcare company here in the U.S. And he grew up as a salesperson, as a hotshot salesperson. And when he was young, one of his first sales calls, he goes into a major corporation looking to sell them their healthcare benefits. And he spent about 20 minutes on his slide presentation. It actually might have been the overhead presentation at the time. It was many years ago. And he's going through all the bells and whistles, and he thought he absolutely nailed it. And they took a little break, and he's in the bathroom, and he's washing his hands, and the CEO of the company was there right next to him washing his hands. And my friend said to the CEO, he was very cocky and confident. He said, quite a presentation, huh? I think I nailed it. Are you guys going to be ready to move forward? And he looked at him and he said 98% of what you just talked about doesn't apply to us. And you did not ask one question during your entire presentation. So no, we will not be going with you.
I've seen business leaders, seasoned business leaders go into meetings and talking about me, myself, and I and their product, and then demoing their product, and never once asking the board of directors who were sitting down, asking them one question about their wants, their needs, the problems they're having, everything, nothing. Absolutely nothing. And it's, when I say that to people, they look shocked. That can't be true. And I says, yeah, it does happen on it.
Yeah, actually, I've got another one because that came to mind when you mentioned that. And I learned early in my career that I wasn't going to send out responses to requests for proposals or decks. To me, that was the most ridiculous thing in the world. And I was maybe only 10 years, maybe 15 years into my career at this point, which was still pretty established. But I remember getting an email from a major recruiting company. Everybody would know the name. And it just simply said, we're interested in perhaps hiring you for sales training. Please send us your deck. And I replied to that. I said, I don't know what you're talking about. I said, I'd be very interested in talking to you about what you're interested in. And they said, well, no, we need to see a deck first. And I replied back, and I realized they wanted to see some type of PowerPoint presentation. And I said, anything I put together couldn't possibly address what you're looking for until I spoke with you. So if you're interested in having a conversation, let's do it. If not, I'll decline.
I'll tell you another story. There was a handyman who went around fixing up houses for a landlord, and there was a problem, and the handyman rang the landlord, and he said to him, "Look, there's an issue here with one of these doors," and the landlord said, "Can you take a photograph of it?" And the handyman went, "What do you do? What do you mean me taking do you think I'd take a camera around with me to take photographs?" Because he had an old phone, but the landlord had a new phone that took photographs. He was going, "What are you talking about? Just use your phone." I says, "I don't have one of those phones. What the hell am I, man city, me taking a camera around with me?" Tell me, Art, what did you get wrong to get right?
What did I get wrong to get right? I would say that I probably, like many people early on, focused too much on trying to make sales instead of trying to help and think about why would this person be interested, what are they interested in, and how can I help them. And when you shift that focus, it's kind of like it shines a different light on things. So many more doors open. And then internally, it's like the pressure is lifted because you're not telling yourself a story of, I've got to put in numbers and I'm treating people like a thing as opposed to a human being that has wants and needs and ways that I may be able to help them. And then it also gets rid of those feelings of fear and rejection, because if there's not a fit, it's not a reflection of I got rejected, they didn't want what I have. It's like, okay, it wasn't a fit. I need to find somebody else where it is a fit and the timing is right and I can help them. And it was really more of a mindset shift. And luckily I got that early on. I mean, you always had that to some degree because you don't become successful by not having that. But then by really embracing it and diving into it, I think that's the major difference between people who are just putting in the numbers and doing a job and the people who are truly ultimate sales professionals.
Yeah, I think it's actually the long game. I think that, and new businesses are people, they think it's, and you said it earlier on in the conversation, it's the sale, close the deal. And I think you have to take a step back and think of the long game. And also, one of the pieces of voices that I give to people as well is detach yourself from the outcome. Know that you are trying to assist and help these people, but you have to qualify to see if it's a fit. But detach yourself from the outcome, because if you're focusing on close the deal, close the deal, close the deal, the person will feel that they're being sold to instead of having a conversation with someone that actually cares about their interests.
Yeah, I'll tell you another story here that kind of relates to that. I was sitting at the bar of a neighborhood restaurant, and I became friends with the owner. And the owner used to be a customer service and sales speaker and trainer, and he decided to follow his passion, which was the restaurant business. But what he did was he implemented what he knew about sales and service into the restaurant business. And we were talking about the differences between great restaurants and ones that fail. And he said it's mostly the people in the process. And he said, for example, when you go into a restaurant, what typically happens? You'll be greeted by somebody who will say, how many people? Okay, they'll grab the menu and they'll just sit you down and they'll say, your server will be here in a minute. And he said, when you have somebody that's doing that, they are just processing people. They're processing a transaction. He said, on the other hand, when you have somebody that smiles, that greets you, looks you in the eye, they greet you, they welcome you, and they say, hey, welcome, thanks for coming. We'll be two of you today, great. And they walk over to the table, maybe have some conversation. We've got some great specials today. Your server is Mary, she'll be with you here in a second. He said that is serving as opposed to processing. And the same thing can be true of salespeople. There are people that do sales, and then there are people that are true sales professionals whose goal is to help people.
Which part of the sale excites you the most?
I don't think I've ever had that question before. I would say, despite everything that we said, I mean, I get charged up about all parts of it, but ultimately the scoreboard is when you actually get a deal, right? And that is something that somebody who's not in sales does not experience, which I feel sad for. Because when you ultimately get somebody to agree to do something that you wanted them to do, but they feel good about it because they feel like they made the decision in the process, that to me is the ultimate, because you have helped somebody, but you're also benefiting in the process, and there's nothing wrong with that. And when you pat yourself on the back for that and you actually reflect, pretty much just created something out of nothing, out of thin air, by my words and by my ideas and by my thinking, that is a tremendous accomplishment. And when you can do that, to me, that's just a high that people not in sales don't get to experience at the level that we do.
You know, the one part I love, I have to admit, is knowing that there's a moment, knowing that the person has bought before it has registered with them. That's, for me, is okay. The deal is done. This is it now. We put all that time and effort and conversations, and it has worked up to this sweet little spot. And now we've come partners in something beautiful. Yeah, that's what I love in it.
That's kind of the ultimate goal, right? When somebody volunteers the sale, you talked earlier about closing. Yeah, to me, closing is, use an American football term, running the ball in from the 1-inch line. That is a no-brainer play. Most teams could do it, right? It's easy. Everybody could do it. The key is moving the ball downfield where we get the point where we can run it in from the 1-inch line. Ultimately, if you get somebody to run the ball in themselves and they volunteer the sale as a result of something we did, and that's what I think you're talking about there, is when they've already made that decision in their own mind that, yeah, this is what I need. I'm going to do this.
Yeah, it's letting them buy it. And I always say when I'm doing mentoring or workshops, I say we're all great at buying things. And when I say, think of something you bought recently. So a house. Did you buy the house, or were you sold a house? Or we bought it. Okay, I want you to look at the sales person, the realtor. They showed you the house. They walked through the rooms. In their mind, they were selling, but in your mind, you were buying, and you made the decision to buy. And they kind of go, "Yeah, you're right." It's a process. Art, you have an amazing. I recommend people sign up to your newsletter. It's great. You've a fantastic book. What edition is it in now?
Third edition.
Third edition. Sorry, third. Yeah. Was there a fourth coming out? Did I hear it's maybe a fourth?
Actually, I'm not sure if we're going to print a fourth edition. Personally, I have created a number of things that have built on the smart calling process. So matter of fact, I have a couple that are in process right now, including some AI tools that help people with the planning of the calls, the gathering of intel, systematizing it, as well as actually helping them with their opening statements and voicemails. So I've got all of that. As far as the book itself, the book is still relevant. It always will be. And as you know, most business books die on the vine in the first year or so. And I wrote the first edition of Smart Calling in 2010, I believe. And here we are 16 years later, still as relevant as ever, because yes, the human brain really hasn't changed in the past, I don't know how many thousands of years, right?
No. Just before we go, I just want to touch on one thing, and I think it's very important, is mindset. And I know we spoke about it at the very beginning of the show, and it's, a lot of people feel a lot of stress, and there's a lot of anxiety in the world, and people feel that it's a performance art as well. And what would you say to a salesperson that's feeling under pressure and they need to take a step back? How do you get them? What would your recommendation be for them to deal with stress and pressure?
Well, again, it goes back to what I mentioned earlier. And stress and pressure is something is normally a story that you have told yourself because it doesn't exist by itself. Because I would ask, well, what is stressing you? And then somebody's going to describe a situation. And then we could further break down that situation and say, well, I have to hit my numbers. Okay, well, let's talk about your numbers. What's preventing you from hitting your number? Is it something you're doing? Is it something that you're not doing? Or is it mostly a story that you're telling yourself? So now we need to break that down further. Or is it that you are putting too much focus on yourself being selfish as opposed to, I don't want to be rejected, so therefore they're not making enough calls, when if they would be making more quality calls, if they would change that up and they would change the story that they're telling themselves about the result, the outcome that they're getting, detaching themselves from the outcome, then all of a sudden they're realizing that, okay, well, this stress or this frustration or this pressure, again, is the story that I'm telling myself. So there's not one easy answer here, but there's a lot of introspection that goes on. Matter of fact, these are all things that we teach. I told you I got into something new. I created an entire course about this. It's called the Ultimate Sales Professional, where people truly work on themselves and on their confidence, their discipline, their being other focused, and truly their identity, how they view themselves as a salesperson. And I firmly believe that we have to be the person who is going to do the things to get the results that we want, as opposed to just trying to jump in and start doing things differently without first changing our mindset in order to be sold ourselves on doing those right things. Because otherwise, we're not going to go to the gym consistently.
I think you're spot on there. I think it's I think mental health is so important in the game as well. We talk about motivation and we talk about excitement and all these different things that help towards the sale. But I think mental health and physical health are so important. Have we left anything out before we wrap up? Have you left anything out that you want to share with us?
I would say really reiterate something you mentioned earlier, and that is work on your curiosity muscle, because when you're curious, that's going to bleed over into your sales calls. And being curious is going to cause you to say, why would these people be possibly interested in what I have to say? And then let that drive how you're going to prepare for your calls, how you're going to create your messaging, and how you're going to show up on your calls. And also be curious about, how can I become better at what I do? And I would ask everybody listening to this, if you're serious about your craft, why wouldn't you try to be the very best that you possibly could be? I was listening to a satellite radio station the other day. It's called The Highway. It's a country radio station. And I can't remember the name of the performer. I've got it written down. But the host asked the performer, do you have anything new coming out? And she said, yeah, I do. I have a new album coming out. And he said, how good is it going to be? And she goes, it's going to be my best ever. And she goes, matter of fact, think about this. Why would somebody put out an album if they didn't think it was going to be their best ever? And I stopped the car and I wrote that down. I spoke it into my phone, because I thought, doesn't that apply to salespeople? If you're doing something anyway, why in the world wouldn't you try to do it to the best of your possible abilities? Unless, of course, you're not that person. If you're just mailing it in and trying to just survive, right?
You know, that nothing happens in a business that something is sold, but people will go and they'll get trained as accountants or engineers, or they'll do degrees, but they won't put in the time to be a professional salesperson, which is crucial for a business success as well, which I always find a bit, I fell in love with sales at 13 and I've spent, decades in the business, and because I love it. I knew at 13 when I sold a baked potato to someone and they gave me money. I spoke about this many times on my show, and someone gave me money and went, oh my God, I love this.
Believe me, I can make a very good living doing this. Actually, I can make a better living than most people doing this.
Yeah,
right?
And that's it. Art, if someone wants to reach out and get your newsletter, where can they sign up to your newsletter? Because it's back up in action again, and it's a brilliant newsletter.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, we just started it up. I had published both paper and email newsletters for about 30 plus years, and then I got away from it and I decided it's time to get back into it because I just see so much misinformation out there. Anyway, it has its own site. It's called smartcallingreport.com. You can subscribe there. There's also all of the back issues. And matter of fact, the most recent issue that we just put out this week on notes, I just got an email yesterday. This is one of the greatest testimonials I've seen. The guy said this issue alone could be a $2,500 training product just on how to take notes on a sales call. And I thought, wow, what an endorsement that was. Anyway, we would love to have you as a subscriber, and it's completely free. And I guarantee you're going to get a lot of how-tos every single week.
Where do they get it? Where can they jump on?
smartcallingreport.com.
Perfect. Last question before we wrap up. Will AI replace salespeople?
AI will replace some transactional type of sales, and it already has, because if you look at some things where AI is already doing it, I mean, it's already being done, right? But AI will never replace things that require human interaction in real time with real empathy and the human touch. AI can assist us in doing that more effectively, but I always tell salespeople, the best salespeople will never have to worry about a job, because you can go out there and create your own job by selling yourself.
Yeah.
And that will always be true.
I think AI is great for research and assistance, but it's not to lead the sales conversation or participate in it. I think it won't. And funny, I'll leave it on this. I seen a funny post on LinkedIn where there's a guy, he had a split picture, and on one side he had a beautiful lay girl, and it said, "This is your AI girlfriend." And on the other side he had, "This is her in the nude," and it was just computer parts on side. And I laughed at that going, yeah. And I said to my wife, she says, yes, people have these AI girlfriends, and she just rolled her eyes and went, what has the world come to on it?
Oh, that's a whole nother episode, I think.
Another one. Thank you for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure, and I hope to have you on in another 7 years. So thank you.
Well, hopefully sooner than that, and I hope to reciprocate as well. Joe, thank you for having me on, and thanks to your audience for listening. And if you have any questions at all, you can reach me through that newsletter site as well.
All right, thank you, and God bless.